session, which is all about going global and how to go global in today's ever-evolving world. So with me today, we have Jane Aitken, who is the head of e-commerce at baby toy retailer Bugaboo. We have Liz Curtis, who is one of our US partners, co-founder of the agency team Bespoke. And we also have Mathias, who is our Webgains Nordics team lead as well, country lead. Lovely to have you all here with us today. And I just want to sort of ask each of you to sort of say a little bit about yourselves. Jane, can I start with you, please?
Absolutely, yes. Hi, Mumtaz. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here today and chat through this topic. I currently head up e-commerce and e-tail for Bugaboo across a number of different regions. So that covers UK and Ireland, the Nordics, Australia and New Zealand. I was previously at Samsung, driving pure play performance and also setting up the direct to consumer e-commerce operations and driving the trade and operations and experience there. But I've also been cross-industry, and not just in nursery and consumer electronics, but also in fashion and telco and FMCG. So I've got quite a broad base.
We're very lucky to have you, Jane. Very lucky to have you giving your insights in the session. Thank you. Liz?
Hi, Mumtaz. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm Liz Curtis, one of the co-founders of the agency team Bespoke here in the US. We're headquartered in Chicago, and it's myself and my two business partners, and we have a long, extensive background in affiliate marketing here in the US, and we work very closely with emerging brands, DTC brands, publisher partners, really focusing on the partnership channel management, and exciting just to be part of all the recent changes and innovation that we've seen within the channel. So thanks again for having me today.
Thank you, Liz. And last but not least, Mathias.
Hi everyone, my name is Mathias Bjoernshauge. I work at Webgains with the Nordic region. I am based in Copenhagen, Denmark, where I work from on a daily basis, advising on starting a new program in all of the Nordic countries. To tell you a little bit about myself, what I've been doing so far in my career, I've spent almost 14 years within the e-commerce industry. I had starting out with my own web shop, and then I transitioned into the deal side industry where I worked at Groupon. I was part of the startup team for Denmark there. So I learned a little bit about the do's and don'ts in terms of being part of an international company like that, trying to adapt to a market like Denmark, and seeing how that went well and what went not so well. Other than that, I have maybe a little bit of an interesting point is that I have spent some time at the company FedEx, getting an insight into the logistics part of the side of things that has to do with shipping globally, and that whole side of the coin in terms of being able to run a successful e-commerce company. So yeah, that's a little bit about myself, and I'm also glad to be here.
Thank you, Mathias. Thank you very much. So without further ado, I'm going to start the questions. So the first question is, starting with you, Jane, what are some of the common mistakes retailers can make when entering a new market? And this is not necessarily just related to the affiliate channel. Any sort of examples that you can give, knowledge they can share, do's and don'ts, basically.
Sure. Well, it's quite complex going into a new market when you need to really understand the nuances in terms of legal framework, particularly around marketing. So you can't necessarily plan a global campaign and roll that out like for like. So, for example, we've run lead gen marketing campaigns. Driven by a competition mechanic, and in certain locales you can't drive that by chance. There needs to be some element of merit, and so there's lots of nuances within that you need to consider. There's also in terms of the physical product, if you're selling product as opposed to service, the requirements around that, so safety laws, particularly in the sector that I work in nursery and baby. Every region has got their own very specific product laws, so that may have an impact on your scalability, because you might not necessarily be able to just drive up the volume on that specific line if it doesn't meet the test and safety standards of those locales, or you may need to make variations for that. So don't be caught out by not knowing what the requirements are in those locales. There's also the subtleties of localization and translation, and making sure that you've got adequate copy resource and to accommodate real authentic and natural copy to fit the environment, and not just a kind of Google Translate quick fix for any campaigns that you might be running, or content on your digital execution. And that also applies to customer service as well. It's all too easy to think that you might be able to support that region from a centralized service center, but making sure that you've got the right language skills to support that new region that you're going into is really important, so that you can really support the customer throughout the journey, pre and post purchase.
Thank you, Jane. That's really, really interesting insights. And I really appreciated also learning the thing about the logistics side of things, the health and safety laws as well. And Mathias, you just mentioned earlier you'd done a stint at FedEx before. Maybe you can sort of also comment on some of the common mistakes, maybe also leveraging of your experience as well on anything that Jane was saying on the health and safety aspect as well.
Yeah, well, I worked with the Nordic region at FedEx. I was part of starting up the inside sales team in Berlin, where we actually hired local native speakers that were living in Berlin to work with selling to that market. And what we quickly understood was that even though geographically we are so close together, there are a lot of differences when it comes to infrastructure and the general logistics and shipping practicalities and metrics that you would measure a successful delivery on. So a lot of the time when you go and you purchase stuff on web shops, you will notice that they are able to give you an estimate on time of delivery. And for a country like Norway, for example, and also Sweden, where you have a lot of mountains in certain regions of the country, this is just simply almost an impossible task to carry out. You have to really pay for it if you want to be able to give a fixed, or at least a very close to reality estimation, because it will then require a carrier to drive to a specific location without actually being able to bring on aboard the truck a lot of other packages going to that specific address. So that was a good example of where we would become a trusted partner at FedEx. Whenever there was a great need of being able to really estimate within a pretty tight window time-wise the delivery of a certain good. But if you wish to expand to something like Denmark, it's very easy, because we have no mountains. There is almost no elevation going on, and it's just such a small country that you can drive from one end to the other in 6 hours. So stuff like that is not necessarily something you think about, but a mountain just coming out of nowhere as soon as you leave a region like a bigger city such as Oslo in Norway, then it makes everything exponentially more difficult in terms of shipping and delivery.
Really great insights. Thank you very much, Mathias. And then the same question to you, Liz. Some of the common mistakes that maybe you've seen in particular with retailers entering the US.
Absolutely. Well, I find the logistics piece of this fascinating, and Mathias, thank you for that. I obviously come from the marketing standpoint, so I do believe as a consumer, you're like, I want my stuff now, and I want to know when it ships. I want a text update. I want a text update when it's like 30 minutes away. Why isn't it here already? Things have become so easy as a consumer, so the expectation is probably unrealistic for a lot of countries, and I find that really interesting. But I would say from what I've seen, after logistics and legal and all the other pieces of that are ready to go, it's still, you cannot assume that your messaging to the consumer is buttoned up. And what's working in Canada, for example, even though that's very close to the US, is going to work in the US. It's eye-opening to see how each market is so unique and different. And the consumer in the US is not forgiving. If you are entering in a new market and introducing your brand to that consumer, you want to make sure that you have a very buttoned up marketing message, brand identity, and making sure that it'll be a great consumer experience. So what we've noticed is really just setting those expectations and making sure that you have a unique plan to that market. And I know that seems kind of like a common sense, like, well, of course that makes sense, right? But I think it's really easy for companies to just assume that they've done all this other work, which sounds very exhausting based off the legal and the logistics. They're ready to go. And then there's that whole other layer of the marketing piece and having a completely different plan for the market that you're going after.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you. And then staying with you on a similar question, are you able to share any examples of like faux pas that you may have seen over the years in terms of new entrants in the US, without obviously, you know, embarrassing anyone and sharing any names?
Absolutely. I will not name drop anyone. All of the brands I've worked with are absolutely lovely, and we all learn from our mistakes. But definitely, I mean, I think there's the common ones of, like I mentioned, with what's the plan in Canada is going to translate to the US, or what you have going on in the US is going to translate in Canada. And I use that example because it's so close to us and it's so easy to assume it could work the same. But how consumers are motivated to purchase and what matters to them is very different based off of the market. I think some things just being lost in translation, the meaning of words. You know, again, here in the US, people are not as forgiving when it comes to, I think, being politically correct or making sure that you're up on the times with what's happening socially. And I'm sure that goes for other markets as well, but I'm speaking more in obviously with the US, but you want to make sure that when you are messaging to the consumer or entering into a new market, that the phrases you're using, the words you're using do not have a different meaning or are going to insult anybody. Because now with the concept of this cancel culture that we see a lot, and it's, the younger generation is really looking to brands as a moral compass. So you do not want to derail from that. You want to make sure that you obviously have a really buttoned up message and that you're aligned with what's happening socially, politically, and to motivate that consumer to purchase.
Thank you, Liz. Really good insights there, especially like the reference to the cancel culture. The same question to you, Jane, as well. Any examples of faux pas?
Sure. Well, there's definitely been a few clangers that I've seen. I think a lot of it comes down to planning, if I'm honest, where I've seen execution from other brands are maybe hastily extending executions globally, and you can see that some of that translation isn't there. So I think, just as Liz was saying about consumers being very unforgiving in the US, I think the world we live in today, a lot of consumers just expect a certain standard of delivery wherever we are in the world. And so having that attention to detail and making sure that there's not sloppy spelling mistakes or perhaps the wrong kind of nuance in punctuation that makes a big difference in that market can really turn a shopper off and drive a detrimental impact to performance of that campaign. But there's also an element of looking at the business operation. Potentially too much localization means that there's separation from the centralized kind of global direction. So having that sweet spot of enough localization within the market to understand what the customer needs are, understand all of those nuances in social context and news stories, just as Liz was talking about, to make sure that there's sensitivity or empathy in the execution that's going out to market. Having enough of that balance while also still maintaining a truth to what the brand identity and direction and purpose is, I think is a difficult balance to strike, but an important one nonetheless.
It's really interesting. Thank you, Jane. I think it's definitely hit the nail on the head there, getting the balance right between too much localization and losing the central direction there. I'm going to switch to a different question now and start with you, Mathias. As a consumer yourself, what would a brand or retailer that is new to your region need to highlight on their site or on their other channels to convince you to buy something from them? So obviously you're in the Nordics, and say if there was a UK or US entrant or Australian entrant that wanted to sort of enter the Nordics, what, as with your customer hat on, what they need to do to convince you to buy from them?
That's a good question. I think we are in a kind of unique situation here in the Nordics where we've unionized almost everything, every single industry, and it fits under some kind of umbrella that you can be a part of or a member of, and then in return receive a stamp of approval, a certification, or verification, which is quite easy to spot, because as a consumer here in the Nordics, you almost subconsciously scan a new website for these badges, which is it essentially are. It's a logo. One of them is called the ETrust mark, that is given to web shops who becomes a member of their service, and then they go through this kind of vigorous process of taking a look at what happens from order receival to the actual carrying out of that order from purchase to delivery. What's the after sales? What does that look like? What's the customer success part of things, and how are they handling all of the communication afterwards in newsletter send outs and all that stuff. So they kind of take a look at your company and make sure that you're up to code on everything GDPR related and data protection wise and all that stuff. And I see it as a great opportunity for coming to the Nordic region as a company that primarily existed elsewhere and haven't done business globally through a centralized web shop with that country before. So it's quite easy way, if you know that you live up to all the standards that are within the web shop and the online the e-commerce industry, then you can kind of just fast forward around and skip all of those, you know, hurdles and obstacles that will be present in the beginning, until you build up this this trustworthiness with consumers from an organic point of view. And that could be done by delivering a lot of products and getting people to review their customer experience in something like Trustpilot, which actually comes from Denmark as well. So we're this kind of tight knit community where we are super educated on what needs to be present and what we in order for us to quickly do our own personal pre-qualification and saying, okay, I actually feel in safe hands and like I'm being taken good care of. And if not, these brands also signifies a insurance for up to 10,000, some of them up to 20,000 Danish kroner or Swedish kroner. So you, in other words, if any dispute were to actually arise, you would be safe by the mere fact that they are part of this initiative.
Great. Thank you, Mathias. And then the same question to yourself, Jane. As a UK consumer, what would a brand or retailer coming from, you know, the EU or from Australia or US, what would they need to do? What do they need to highlight to convince you to buy from them?
Well, let's put assumptions in place that they've done a great job of raising awareness and really put the right investment into that. So we know that they exist, because that's crucial, number one. But Mathias really touched on something that is crucially important, and that is about building trust and credibility. So how you're presenting the brand, it needs to look, you know, polished and slick. Your experience on the front end needs to mirror that, so that it looks authentic. You don't want to rush in and necessarily you know, have a site that's too slow, or images that don't load with poor quality, or broken pages or broken links, for example, and making sure that any awareness driving that you're doing lands to the right place, so that journey is really easy and smooth for the shopper. But trust badges, things as Mathias mentioned, like Trustpilot or review scores. So if you've got shopper responses and reviews back from other markets, use those. Don't necessarily bury them because they're not driven from that market that you're trying to expand out into. Showing that it's a product that's existed elsewhere and traded really well and been well received by other consumers, it goes a really long way. The product also needs to do what it says and live up to the promise. It needs to be a quality product, and it's basic marketing, really. Good product for the right price, so that the consumer feels that what they're paying is fair. But the service throughout the journey also needs to be strong and solid. So if there's queries in the journey, if you've got click to chat, for example, on the website, that really helps that shopper get confidence that they'll be supported once they've got their order or they've received it. It's not just a pre-sales tool, but it can reassure that if they have any issues, they've got somewhere to go and they're going to be listened to and dealt with and handled quickly. So there's just a few little tidbits of things that I think, you know, as a new retailer, you know, just getting the experience right, making sure that there's authenticity but credibility around what you're putting out there, and that the consumer is getting a good experience, and end to end that's been considered.
Great. Thank you so much, Jane. We are almost out of time, but Liz, do you have anything you can add in, maybe like a 10-second tidbit to that question as well? Like what would they need to do to convince you to buy from them?
Absolutely. I definitely agree with on the theme of trust, and that's where I was at as well. And typically, I don't think you need a flashy promotion, although like promotions and deals are always nice, right? But it's, again, the making sure from letting the consumer know who the brand is, who you are, your brand identity, what you're about, to just continue to build from that trust there. And a lot of times it's just about expectations. Yes, we want everything now and we want the product in 2 days, but realistically, that might not be possible, right? So just setting the expectations and making sure that then they know, like from a shipping, that they have the confidence to make the purchase, that they know they'll receive it, and it's not going to be this dark hole of, which has happened to me, like 3 months later something arrives and you're like, I didn't even know I ordered that, and then never again, because you don't have trust in obviously that brand anymore. But again, I think it's just going back to communicating, knowing your brand identity, who you are. I love Jane's point too about as you continue to expand in different markets, yes, you want to have different unique marketing campaigns based off of that consumer in the market, but knowing who your brand is and that foundation is solid, and that doesn't change. And I think if you have that in place, then that trust, that authentic vibe that everybody wants, from a brand is going to stay true and will really resonate. Sorry, that was not 10 seconds.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you very much, all of you for joining this session, and for taking part in this debate. I really appreciated the insights from all of you, and I'm sure our audience do as well. Thank you very much, everyone, and stay safe.